Madam Secretary, I don't know if you can take us behind the scenes now that the debt ceiling deal is complete. How close did we really get? And I know prior to the deal, you'd be asked the question, whose bills were you going to pay first and what kind of preparations were you making? And I think you didn't really want to answer the question. Now that that's off the table, can you tell us a little bit about how that all would have worked?
Well, what I can tell you is that what I said and what President Biden said from the outset is that to protect our economy and our financial markets from catastrophe, what's necessary is to find a consensual, bipartisan approach to raising the debt ceiling. And that was my focus. That was President Biden's focus. That was what was achieved. I think it's a win for the American people because had the debt ceiling not been raised, regardless of what approach was taken, the consequences would have been very adverse, very significant, and very negative. I believe a recession would have been very likely, and we could have had a global financial crisis, higher interest rates for a very long time. So fortunately, although our balance dipped to very low levels, we continued to be able to pay all of America's bills. And it's important to realize there was a commitment from all parties in this negotiation not to default on the debt, to find a bipartisan solution. And I think it's a win for the American people that occurred. And it's also important to recognize that Social Security and Medicare were protected. Medicaid was protected. Had that not occurred, 21 million Americans could have lost health care. Veterans' benefits were protected. And as important, now that our economy is operating in the vicinity of full employment, we're very focused on investing in America, strengthening long-term prospects for our economy, to make it more competitive, to create good jobs. And the trifecta of legislation that was passed, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Act, those both bipartisan, the Inflation Reduction Act, the important things there have been preserved.
Right. Madam Secretary, I guess not everyone agrees, obviously, depends on where you're sitting. But some people think a lot of that spending contributed to the 40-year highs that we saw in inflation, with a lot of other factors as well. That contributes to a 525 basis point increase in rates. That makes investing in all these things more difficult, since so much of what we bring in needs to be spent on servicing our debt. So it seems like it's a really difficult, sort of a conundrum that we want to spend money on things to help people, but the more we spend, the less we have left over after we service our debt. Do you think we need to cut spending somewhere where we can, so we can spend it in better places?
Well, look, this bipartisan agreement just cut the deficit by $1 trillion. And the deficit fiscal stimulus has declined, certainly since the pandemic ended. So that is supporting the Fed's efforts to bring inflation down. I don't think there's a trade-off between investing in America and doing spending that will improve the trajectory for our economy and job prospects. There's not a conflict between that and running a responsible fiscal policy. President Biden offered a budget that has significant further investments in our economy while lowering deficits over 10 years by $3 trillion. But revenue needs to be part of that discussion. It's not all a matter of spending. I think we, in the interest of tax fairness and having the resources to invest in our economy, we also need to be considering proposals that would enhance revenue while also controlling spending.